and that's why I do it. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Brock Young. It is my pleasure to be here. Real quick, can I get a quick sound check? How do I sound?
Loud and clear.
Awesome. I love it when it's loud and clear as opposed to broken and distorted. I am a retired 100% disabled veteran who participated in a federal skill bridge internship with the very agency I am now deputy director of. As the deputy director for the San Francisco Federal Executive Board, SFFEB, we are one of 28 FEBs, all of which are located outside of DC in areas that have large concentrations of federal agencies and federal employees. I work to link senior agency officials and build cooperative relationships across Northern California, my area of responsibility. One of the things we do is assist agencies to find methods and ways to fill resource shortfalls, talent being one of them. I use my position to help federal partners fill vacancies and webinars like this to help the public, veterans, transitioning service members, and military spouses become more competitive when applying for those positions. In addition to offering this webinar, we, the San Francisco Federal Executive Board, facilitate the Veterans Federal Employment Collaborative, or VFEC. It is a national collaborative that focuses on connecting federal agencies and vacancies with qualified veterans and transitioning service members. The LinkedIn and Facebook groups will be shared at the end of this presentation for any of the veterans or military spouses on the call. One of the biggest things preventing talented people from becoming federal employees is their resume. That's why we're all here, after all, the federal resume. Think of the federal resume as an assessment of your writing abilities, research skills, and how well you follow instructions. But perhaps federal resume development isn't the right name for what we're trying to do here. Why? Because a regular federal resume won't get you interviews or a federal job. You're going to need more. You're going to need to put your resume on beast mode in order to set you apart from the hundreds, sometimes thousands of other applicants who are also applying to the position. If you are looking for that remote unicorn, then you're looking at even more competition for the position. Never mind that many announcements close the same day that they are posted because they've reached their application quota. And yes, I'm dating myself here with this animation. Finding and securing a federal career is a process. Some have called it a job in itself. We're all here to prepare you and your resume so that when opportunities pop up, you will be ready to jump on them. How else can you prepare? Well, ask yourself, how are you getting hold of announcements that you are interested in or qualified for? Do you have a USA Jobs search saved? Do you have it sent to you daily? Are you applying to your dream jobs before they close and you lose your chance? Are you looking for that remote unicorn? Consider all of these things as part of your preparation. What we will cover today. First, we'll talk about what we won't be covering. Next, we will discuss the federal resume, dispel some myths, and cover a broad overview of the resume development process. Then, we will dive into building your federal resume. This will include sources you can and should get information from, different formats, required and optional sections, etc. Next, we'll discuss what specialized experience, competencies, and the assessment questionnaire are and how to tailor your resume to them. We will then talk about methods of wordsmithing and adding context to your experience. Then we will go into translating your experience, which will be really important for our veterans and transitioning service members. Finally, we will go over some closing tips and additional resources. Again, please hold all of your questions until given the opportunity to ask them. I don't want to miss something that you put in the comment section earlier in the presentation, but every so often we will pause, and I will have, every so often we will pause for questions, and we'll have a longer Q&A at the end of the presentation. Next, we will pause about the 1 hour mark for a short 5-minute break, and then we will dive into the final final hour of our presentation. Finally, please keep your mics on mute unless you're called on or reading for the group. Things we won't be covering. I don't want to waste our time with things you may already know or on things that already have excellent resources to answer. USA Jobs and the Office of Personnel Management have a great series of videos explaining how to use the system, apply to jobs, as well as answer other questions you might have about the process. These are some useful links, and the link to the USA Jobs YouTube channel will be provided at the end of the presentation. Federal myths. Let's knock some of these out. There are tons of myths out there that often prevent or discourage people from applying for federal jobs. Let's dispel some of the myths about the federal resume and the federal hiring process. Up front, for those of you retiring from the active duty military, the 180-day employment restriction only applies to military retirees and only for certain DoD jobs and organizations. But even then, there is a waiver process, as well as careers, job series, and locations that aren't included in the restriction. So before you turn your back on DoD agencies, make sure you know the facts and whether or not they are the ones included in the restriction. As for every other federal agency, you are free and open to apply to them and even start work with them while you're on terminal leave. The next myth is a big one and is one that I frequently run into. A federal resume should not exceed 2 pages. This is absolutely false. A federal resume requires more information than a regular civilian or corporate resume, therefore is typically longer than 2 pages. We will go in depth on things that should be included in your federal resume later in this presentation. But make sure you are paying attention to the announcement. Some agencies do have page limits, Homeland Security investigations, for instance. Though, for most applications, your resume needs to be as long as it needs to be in order to show you have the qualifications and experience the agency is looking for. Another myth I run into is I must move to Washington, D.C. if I want to work for the federal government. This is false. Only about 15% of the federal jobs out there in Washington, D.C. or the D.C. metro area, while approximately 83% are found in multiple locations throughout the country, with the remaining 2% outside of the United States. Though for full disclosure, some agencies would like you to move to DC for a time or do a rotation through their headquarters for development and promotion purposes. Another myth I run into are that resumes are scanned for keywords by an automated system. This is absolutely false. Experience and research tells me that real people, human resources specialists, will be the ones to review, rate, and score your resume. The only truly automated portion of the process is you filling out your USA Jobs information and self-assessment. Another myth is that federal HR specialists will know what you did in the military. Almost to a person, no, they will not. Veterans and transitioning service members need to translate your skills and experience into something civilian HR specialists understand. Don't assume the reviewer knows what your service entailed or what skills and competencies you demonstrated. Another myth, jobs that close before the closing date means the agency had someone in mind, which caveats into another myth, you have to know someone to get a federal job. These are both false. You do not need to know someone to get a federal job or be promoted. If you are qualified for a federal position, you can write a competitive federal resume. Make sure you add your knowledge, skills, and accomplishments into your resume and answer the questionnaire, giving yourself all the credit that you can. You have to apply correctly following the directions. You can get best qualified and referred to a supervisor without knowing anyone in the government. But networking, understanding the federal hiring process, asking for advice, getting your name out there are all ways to ensure that you're in the know when opportunities do pop up. When a job announcement closes before the closing date, this typically means that the agency received their limit of applications. Again, this happens when an agency knows they're going to be inundated with applicants and there are only so many HR reviewers to go around. Other myths include military and civilian experience are different. This is absolutely false. All professional experience is experience, whether it was gained in the military, state or volunteer service, or a private job. Where you got it doesn't matter. You want to express that you have the specialized experience the agency is looking for, saying that the experience was gained in the military or in volunteer status makes them think your experience is limited only to that and doesn't translate. Another myth, you can't work for the federal government if you have a criminal record. This is false. People with criminal records are eligible to compete for a vast majority of federal jobs. During the hiring process, federal agencies are generally required to consider people with a criminal record if they are among the best rated candidates and can comply with the job requirements. There are, of course, some exceptions because specific laws or statutes prohibit employment depending on the crime committed. For example, certain federal laws, like those prohibiting treason, carry with them a lifelong ban on federal employment. Other federal laws prohibit federal employment for a certain number of years. The Bond Amendment imposes restrictions related to national security positions, and the list goes on. Another myth is you will need a security clearance to qualify for a federal job. This is false. First, not all federal jobs require a security clearance. You can find this information in the job announcement. However, even if you think a security clearance will set you apart, all federal positions require the candidates to undergo a suitability adjudication process to determine if the individual is suitable for federal employment. This means that in addition to meeting the qualifications of a job announcement, an individual is determined likely or not likely to be able to carry out the duties of a federal job with appropriate integrity, efficiency, and effectiveness. For reference, when I became a federal employee, I had just completed 24 years in the Army and was just re-adjudicated for a top secret clearance the year before. I was re-adjudicated that next year for another top secret clearance with the Environmental Protection Agency. I had people actually calling me, asking me if I was in trouble or there was something they should know about because they were getting two calls, one person from the same investigator within a year of each other. So that was interesting. Are there any other myths that anybody has heard about? You can go ahead and raise your hand or come off mute if you would like to. Andre, yes, the slides will be shared. However, the slide deck is very large, so I'll have to see how I can go about sending that out. I may change it into a PDF and send it that way. If not, again, this recording will be loaded to YouTube by tomorrow. All right, no additional myths. We will move on. First off, everything we will discuss here is a way of doing things. Like most things, there is no single the way to complete a federal resume. This isn't to scare you, just manage expectations. Some agencies like longer resumes, some require a resume of a certain length. Some like narratives instead of bullets, but most will accept either. What we will discuss today are best practices that have generally been shown to work, and by that I mean I use them personally and have been hired by the federal government twice. Bottom line up front, your federal resume is your federal job application. It conveys your work history and experience to a potential employer. It is used to determine minimum qualifications as well as the best and most qualified candidates. It can be unlimited in length unless specified by the agency. However, a good rule to follow is that your federal resume needs to be as long as it needs to be in order for you to get the job. A federal resume must be written and tailored to the announcement and show specific and relevant accomplishments and information. Relevant means experience, knowledge, skills, and/or training that applies to the job you're applying to. If it's not relevant, leave it out of your resume. There's a reason this gets its own slide. I know that when I started this process, I included everything I did when I was in the service, no matter how small. While much of it could be seen as relevant, there was plenty that was not because of the career fields I was looking into. For instance, an agency won't care that I got my entire platoon to pass the physical fitness test at one point. But don't discount your experiences and achievements just because they appear irrelevant on the surface. Look deeper at what you did and adjust the context of your experience to include how you did it, the competencies you demonstrated. Planning, using computers to develop training, holding employees accountable, finding ways to motivate them and demonstrating leadership, and ultimately achieving success. The federal resume is your first and potentially only opportunity to impress the hiring manager. Your resume is the best method to market yourself to a potential employer. It must show how you meet the minimum qualifications and must include examples of how, when, and where you use the competency or skill they're looking for. If it's not in your resume, it doesn't matter. It is not how you think you meet the qualifications. It's how your resume articulates how you meet the qualifications. This is a big one. No one will assume what you did. You have to be clear about articulating what skills and competencies you demonstrated. And when developing your federal resume, don't go for the minimum qualifications. You want to shoot for either very highly qualified, which means you exceed the minimum qualifications, or best qualified, which means you substantially exceed the minimum qualifications. All right, foot stomp again. The rule is if it is not in your federal resume, if it is not in your resume, it does not count. Do not include things, however, like photographs or videos of yourself, or any sensitive information like PII, including age, date of birth, marital status, protected health information, religious affiliation, social security number, etc. These are all prohibited items and should be kept out of your resume. This includes your LinkedIn or other social media profile links. When you open your social media profile, what's typically the first thing that's sitting there? A picture of yourself. So it will be removed, it meaning your application will be removed from consideration if you have any of this information here under the do not include header. All right, just take a minute, think for yourself. Where could you find information to put in your resume? Think about that for a second. Here's a short and not complete list that includes previous job descriptions and announcements. These are a good place to find information to add to your resume. For the veterans and transitioning service members, in addition to your joint service transcript, you can also use your VMET or verification of military experience and training. Links to these will be included at the end of this presentation. Both of these applications have a list of what you did, your MOSs, jobs, job series, and schools you went to, all written in more or less civilian terms. Additional places to get information for your resume can include annual personnel evaluations, end of course evaluations, teacher or instructor feedback, course syllabus, etc. And don't forget any awards you've received. Those should definitely go into your resume. What other sources of information can people use to get information for their resume? Go ahead and type it into the chat box. See if we got something new. Or you can come off mute and go ahead and call it out. Ooh, there we go. Certificate. Oh, there you go. Self-assessment. Good. Certifications. Good. Certifications training, on-the-job training. Good. No, that's excellent. Those are a couple of good ones. We will discuss both of those actually here shortly. For the service members, transitioning service members or veterans, as discussed, one place to find excellent information is your joint service transcript. It explains in civilian terminology what you did. Here's an example from my own JST background in JST. For the record, I did download these about a year after I retired, so I was not actively in the service, but my record was still open and accessible. Just a heads up. Evaluations are a great place to find achievements, but again, for those with military experience, you have to be sure to rewrite your experiences in civilian terms. Civilian and military course completion certificates, 1059s, etc., are also another great place to find information and will typically include the skills, tasks, and competencies you are required to demonstrate in order to graduate. If you attended a course and that course required you to demonstrate certain competencies in order to graduate, make sure you put those competencies, skills, and achievements in your resume. Don't forget to include any experience you might have in leadership roles in social or civic organizations. Whether or not you have volunteer or other unpaid experiences. Any projects with your local schools or programs like 4-H, FFA, or booster clubs. Projects like speaking engagements or if you have writing credits. And don't forget any professional or academic challenges and or successes you had while in college. All of this can be and should be added to your federal resume. Up front, I don't like the USA Jobs Resume Builder because it's not as flexible as using a Word file. There are a bunch of templates out there if you look online. When considering what format to use, I recommend you find a format that allows you to best convey your information. But keep in mind that your resume still has to be clear and easy to read for the Federal Human Resources Specialist who reviews it, rates it, and scores it. If you still need one, feel free to reach out to me following this webinar and I'll send you the format that I use and recommend. Up front, federal resumes do not need to be flashy. I recommend you keep your resume font the same font type and color throughout. It should be black in color, 11 to 12 point size, Arial, Times New Roman, or Garamond font. The use of capitalization, bold print, and italics can be used for headers and to highlight information within your resume. Things like text boxes, colors, and tables can actually take away from what you are trying to convey, and that is your experience. Additionally, these things can cause issues if someone exports your resume from PDF to Word. Finally, read the fine print. Some agencies have different requirements like page length, if they accept non-USA jobs, system resumes, date formats, etc. Always read the entire announcement. For the record, the reason I don't like the USA Jobs Resume Builder is exactly for that last point. Some agencies will require month, day, year as a resume format, or excuse me, as a date format in your resume. However, the USA Jobs Resume Builder only allows you to put date and year. We will discuss more on why this is an issue shortly. Building your federal resume, the format. Your federal resume must include the following: contact information, something I will also refer to as the introduction section. It must include your work experience, any education, and as well as any volunteer experience, academic awards, achievements, or memberships, as well as references. I always recommend putting at least 3 professional references. I see in the thing, how about using USA? How do you feel about, I just said that, I don't like using the USA Jobs Resume Builder, causes some issues. However, just to confirm, you shouldn't submit a PDF. That is not correct. I can answer that question later. The Renata is I always submit a PDF, not the Word file. So I will use a Word file to develop my resume, save that Word file as a PDF, and then upload that PDF. And then Christine, USA Jobs Builder only reads the first 5 pages. I'll have to check on that one. I don't know about that because the USA Jobs Resume Builder has some other limitations like character count, that kind of thing. So I'm not sure about the statement about the 5 pages, but if that's true, cool. If not, that's another reason I don't use it. Your federal resume should also include any relevant professional training, including the training name and location, sponsoring organization, start and end date, as well as the number of hours. Should include certifications, which include the granting organization, location, city, dates, the certification is in effect, earned, etc. Oh, gotcha. Okay, we'll talk more about that here in a little bit, Christine. As well as any military schools, organization, location, city, dates, completed, graduated, as well as I recommend adding a short summary of what you learned, skills, and competencies, because a civilian HR rep won't know that the military course is relevant unless you tell them. Contact information or the introduction section should include your full name as listed in your records, your address, though pay attention to the fine print. Some agencies consider full street address PII, should include your telephone number, as well as a professional email address. For any of you who are in school, college, or the military, lose the .mil and the .edu. Get an email address that you will use well past that, something professional, nothing like the ones you see on screen, which are two actual email addresses of someone who reached out to me asking for resume help. As an example, this is my introduction section. You see here that I hit all of the requirements, but also put my own shine on it with the job number and title of the position I'm applying for. This way, it requires me to change at least one thing on every resume. Regarding the veteran's preference and special hiring authority eligibility, we will discuss this more here in a little bit towards the end of the presentation. Actually, I lied. We'll talk about them right now. For those of you new to the federal hiring system, there are many special hiring authorities you can use to give you a head start when applying. For veterans, when it comes to your resume, veterans preference and special hiring authorities are two separate things and serve two different purposes. I will discuss these more towards the end of our presentation. Language proficiency levels are good to include if relevant to the position you're applying for. Current and active duty clearances, as discussed, aren't that important within the federal government on the federal resume, since nearly every agency will reinvestigate you as part of their onboarding process. If including your clearance, I recommend including your adjudication date. This way, the agency that's hiring you knows that they shouldn't have any issues when and if you're reinvestigated by their organization. Again, make sure you read the fine print of the announcement and include everything they want to see and nothing they don't. Again, some agencies consider your street address, LinkedIn, and LinkedIn URL to be PII and will remove your resume from consideration if they are there. I see. Do you use your home address or training provider's corporate address if any remote training? That's up to you. It's kind of depends on how you want to do it. And ultimately, it's about how you can answer the boss or supervisor, whoever's hiring you. So does that make sense, Mr. D. Funderburk? All right, I'm sure they'll. Oh, makes sense. All right, cool. Next, moving on. All right. For the veterans in the audience, it is a myth that military and civilian experience are different. I actually added this slide today because I have reviewed at least 7 resumes in the past 48 hours, and all of them had some separation of military and corporate professional experience. Again, all professional work experience is work experience. This includes part-time and unpaid experiences as well. You want to express that you have the specialized experience that the agency is looking for. Saying that the experience was gained in the military or volunteer or during state service makes them think your experience is limited only to that. You want the agency to know that you have the experience they're looking for. Where you got it doesn't matter. Another one that I've run into recently is your federal resume should be in reverse chronological order, starting with your most current position and working backwards. My recommendation for consistency is do the same with all of your sections. Your education should be in reverse chronological order. Your awards should be in reverse chronological order. Your writing credits should be in reverse chronological order. Your federal resume should cover the last 10 years of work experience, but this is only a recommendation. If you don't have a work history up to 10 years because of, say, high school, make sure you also include any jobs or volunteer activities you participated while in high school. If you need to go back farther than 10 years to show you have the qualifications the announcement is asking for, do so. Your resume can be in bullet or narrative format. You need to figure out what is the best way for you to convey your experience. Don't forget to include any part-time or unpaid experiences that might overlap with your full-time work. This is especially important when you have a part-time job or gig that required you to demonstrate vastly different skills and competencies than your full-time job. You want to get credit for what you did, and again, if it's not in your resume, it didn't happen. Yes, Christine, I will go over the special hiring authority. I actually have several a slide going over that in depth. All right, building your federal resume, your work experience. Each position must include the job title. For the military veterans out there, civilians won't know what a sergeant major, NCOIC, watch NCO, or petty officer is. Try first line supervisor, senior instructor, organizational, administrative, and logistics manager, etc. Employer's name. For the vets and transitioning service members, this is the only section in your resume that you can and should use military terms because that is the organization that you worked for. For instance, 1002nd Transportation Company, or Naval Facilities Engineering Systems Command, or NAVFAC, or Bravo 152nd Aviation Support Battalion. Again, this is the only place that you probably can and should use military terms, but that's it. Dates. USA Jobs Resume Builder will only allow you to put the month and year, but some agencies want the month, day, year, and will toss your resume if you don't have them, which has surprised a lot of people, I'm sure, if they've been using the USA Jobs Resume Builder applying for jobs and they're automatically kicked out. Next, you want to make sure you have your supervisor's name and phone number. But don't be afraid to put no as to whether or not the agency can contact your supervisor, but be prepared to answer why. We have a question. Should overlapping volunteers positions such as 4-8 or PTA work be listed within the work experience section or be listed in a separate volunteer work section? Well, Terry, I've got two answers to that. Probably neither of them are very good. One, either. Two, it's up to you. So in short is however you feel that you can best convey your information. Me personally, I have my volunteer experience in a separate section. However, if your volunteer experience, if you're able to weave your volunteer experience into your professional work experience section, by all means, please do so. There is no hard line rule on which way to do it. That answer your question? All right, back to my resume. So using this example from my resume, as a federal employee, I include both my pay band, series, grade, and step, as well as my salary, so it is the same as the rest of my experience blocks. I like consistency. I get twitchy when things are different. Since this is a federal position, I make sure to include the statement, this is a federal position. Note, for the purposes of federal resumes, military service and government contracting positions are not considered federal positions. So you don't need to put this is a federal position for military service or government contracting. Here's another example from my resume. Notice that I don't have this is a federal position. Again, this is because even though you might have been active duty military, you are not considered a federal employee when it comes to federal hiring. I want to point out something I do that isn't required and may hurt your resume in some cases. I actually deleted out of this one. However, you can include in parentheses that you are, for instance, maybe an 04 in an 04 position, which was equivalent to a GS-13. This information was pulled from a DoD financial management regulation, but may not be something you want to try if you are an NCO applying for a job at a higher a higher GS level. This example shows how you can add part-time or reservist National Guard positions that run concurrent with your full-time job. Remember, the salary and hours information here are considered typical and should be an average of the hours per week you work and pay. For this example, since I was AGR or Active Guard Reserve, I also had a part-time National Guard position with duties and responsibilities far different than my full-time position. Because I was active duty, I didn't get paid for my M-Day job, so I show that by including the statement unpaid in the salary section. For those who have been activated, put on orders for an extended period of time, etc., I recommend you include those achievements, include those as achievements in your experience. Are there any questions? You can go ahead and come off mute or post your question in the chat box. All right. Seeing none, hearing none, we are moving on. Before we go into detail on methods of writing quality experience bullets, let's talk some generalities. Solid federal resumes are about three things: detail, detail, and detail. Your experiences need to include examples of what you managed, did, and or tasks you completed, not what you were responsible for or assisted with. Your resume needs to describe the scope of your duties, how many employees you supervised, how much money you managed, were you a decision maker, as well as including examples when and where you can. It should include examples of your accomplishments, awards, and recognition you earned, as well as details and summaries of why you earned them. Try to use quantifiable metrics whenever and wherever possible. For instance, improved X by Y% within Z months. What's the word I've used a couple times there? That's right, examples. If you're not going to give examples of how, where, when you used a competency or skill, you might as well not even include that competency or skill in your resume. Ken, we'll get back to that here in a little bit. If you want to hold on to that one, we'll answer it at the end. All right, nothing. Let me go back one. Yep, there we go. All right, so we've all seen them. We've all seen these summary or objectives or personnel profile or lists of skills and achievements, those sorts of things. Bottom line is, nothing you include in a list of skills or in your summary or objective statement will count towards assessing your qualifications. Even though many templates and examples you see have these lists of skills, competencies, and or achievements, don't think you're going to be able to hit the easy button and put all of the required competencies into one of these lists and have it count towards your qualifications. It won't. Even if you're using one of these templates, make sure you're including and mentioning everything you have in these sections in your experience section with examples, metrics, etc. Describe how you use the programmer skill, in what environment, how often, if you were considered an expert or not. Did people come to you for advice on these matters or competencies? Were the reports you wrote for managers or senior executives? And were those reports used to make decisions? If you would like to include one of these summaries in your resume, keep it to 3 to 5 sentences. You can think of it like a smaller, more focused cover letter, giving the hiring manager some information that may not necessarily be relevant to the announcement, but something you feel they should know. Your experience section is important. This is not, and anything you put into this section will not count towards your experience and qualifications. Again, think of your federal resume as a test, the first of several challenges you need to overcome in order to become a federal employee. Every test has questions, and understanding those questions can be key to passing or failing. For federal resumes, the test questions are made up of specialized experience, competencies, required training or education, if applicable, and the assessment questionnaire. First, without the required specialized experience as defined in the announcement, it is unlikely that your application will be considered best qualified and referred to the hiring manager. The book definition of specialized experience is a type of work experience that is directly related to and relevant to the position which you are applying for. Next, sections in the job announcement that refer to how you will be qualified and evaluation factors and competencies are telling you the metrics that the federal agency and human resources specialist are going to use to grade your resume. When grading, the agency will determine how well your resume describes how, when, how often you have used the competencies the agency is looking for. Next, you need to ensure you have any required courses, education, or training. Again, this is if applicable, and this is one of the one section that may not be in every announcement. This section includes any special or specific schooling, education course requirements, certifications, etc. Finally, the assessment questionnaire selections you make should accurately describe your training and experience carrying out the task they are asking about. We will go into each of these in detail, but first let's talk about how to format your bullets and narratives. When wordsmithing your experiences and examples in your resume need to paint a clear picture about how, when, and where you gained the experience and meet the qualifications the announcement is looking for. When writing your experiences, think implied versus specified. The best answer is you must specify everything, even the things you believe are in the implied category. What do I mean by implied versus specified? Let's take a look at the example of taking out the garbage. The specified task is take out the garbage. Implied with that would be remove the bag from the bin, walk to the front door, open the front door, walk to the garbage can, open the garbage can, put the bag into the garbage can, close the lid, return to the house, closing the front door, and replace the bag in the bin. When describing what you did, you should be as clear and detailed as possible. And don't just include how, when, and where, but also the skills used. Maybe you used another skill like oral communication. If you did, make sure you state whether or not you expressed information to individuals or groups effectively, as well as making clear and convincing oral presentations. Why? Because this is the definition of oral communication is asking for. Excuse me. Because this is what the definition of oral communication is asking for. Don't just say written communication skills, but include how, what, when, where, and whether or not you have been recognized for writing in a clear, concise, organized, and convincing manner for the intended audience, which ties it back to the mosaic definition of the competency. I will get more into mosaic here in a little bit. Don't just say you worked with computers, but also if you use Microsoft Office suites such as Excel, PowerPoint, spreadsheets, etc., as well as how often. Did you use them daily, weekly, routinely as part of your job? For our veterans and transitioning service members out there, writing in civilian language means avoiding militarisms and jargon. Private companies and federal agencies don't have NCOICs, petty officers, sergeants major, platoons, ships, or brigades. For current federal employees, it's important to avoid agency or office specific jargon when you're applying to another office or agency. This means you need to translate those things to something HR reviewers and managers understand as well. I've stated it before and will again several more times. You want the agency to know your experience is experience. Where you got it doesn't matter. This is the same with acronyms. Use them sparingly, if at all, and always spell them out at least once. Finally, when it comes to numbers, I recommend either spelling out or writing all the zeros. For instance, 35 million with 6 zeros has way more of a wow effect than just 35M. When defining your role, state the facts. Did you work on your own as part of a team as a supervisor? Did you assist with other functions? Did you manage supervisors? Go beyond listing your job responsibilities by using accomplishments and examples to highlight the results of your work experience. Again, avoid jargon when describing your duties. Use civilian terms when describing your organization. Instead of brigade, try an organization of over 2,000 personnel, or agencies, or directorates, offices, etc. Avoid military-only organization titles like battalions or squadrons. When developing your resume, it should reflect clearly the professional level you worked at. It should paint a clear picture whether or not you are a doer or a policymaker. Your bullets and narratives need to show you have entry, middle, senior, or executive level experience, depending on the announcement. Before we go into detail on how to find the specialized experience, competencies, etc., and then what to do, let's take a moment to touch on a couple of techniques to help you capture and articulate your experience to maximize the effect. If you want to format your bullets and narratives to help add context to your context to your experience, use the PAR or STAR methods as a template. Doing this not only gives you a strong format for your experience, but it will give you a practice for the future when you eventually get your interviews, where it is strongly recommended you respond using the PAR or STAR method. We'll start with the PAR method. PAR stands for problem, the situation, the issue. This sets the context. The action, what you did, the steps you took. And finally, the result, the numbers or metrics. This is an example using the STAR method to develop a resume bullet. You see here, the individual sets the context, talks about the actions, and finally discusses what the results were. The STAR method, again, is also a recommended method of answering the behavioral interview questions you will face during your eventual interview. Start thinking positive. You will get the interviews. It's a good habit to start writing and speaking in those terms now. STAR stands for situation or background. The task, which is the problem to solve, the challenge, the goal to reach, or the task to complete. The A is actions, your actions, the step you took to complete, how you achieved the goal, what skills did you use, explain your process. Finally, the results, how you contributed, benefit, improved your organization or the process. What important lessons did you learn or skills did you gain through the outcome? This is an example of using the STAR method to develop a resume bullet. But how do you locate the specialized experience within the announcement? Most USA Jobs webinars and classes will explain what is meant by specialized experience, so I'm not going to go too in depth on this one. Here are examples from this particular announcement. Take a look at the first line on the page. You must have 1 year of specialized experience equivalent to at least the next lower grade, in this case, a GS 11. This means your resume must not only show you have the experience that the agency is looking for at the grade you are applying to, but must also show you would have met the time and grade requirements for the next lower grade. How do you make sure you're meeting this requirement? By ensuring your entire resume, to include past positions, is tailored to the announcement. Neglecting this is the reason most people, to include myself when I started, will receive those did not meet the minimum requirements for this position emails. I'll discuss this more here in a second. Remember the first required specialized experience. You must have 1 year of specialized experience at the level of difficulty and responsibility equivalent to the GS 11 grade in the federal service. This is where most people get derailed because they spend all of their time writing to the current position and then neglect to ensure all of their past positions show the applicable growth and qualifications required by the announcement. Many announcements will lay out what experience at the next lower level looks like, but many don't. This means researching what experience looks like at the next lower level. OPM, or the Office of Personnel Management, has an entire library on competencies and skills at various levels and within certain job series. You can also gain insight from looking at lower level positions within the same agency or job series. The slide here shows a short example of how to show progression in your resume. For instance, the current position bullet would read writes policies for the organization, whereas the most recent past position bullet would include enforces policies for the organization. Back to the must-have 1 year of specialized experience. How do you make sure you have this requirement? By making sure your employment dates are correct. Presumably, but it should be more than 2 to 3 sentences. Love, guest, sorry, that's all I see is love. I'm going to get in that in a second. So I'd say depends on that one. However, back to the must-have 1 year of specialized experience. How do you make sure you have this meet this requirement? By making sure your employment dates are correct. All computations of your work experience start with the dates you were in the position. Without knowing how many weeks per year and hours per week you did something, a federal HR specialist can't determine your qualifications. In the federal government, 52 weeks is an important benchmark. For federal folks, 52 weeks of experience equals 52 35 to 40-hour work weeks. This is why the reviewing HR professional needs to know your employment dates, your exact employment dates. Don't think you're getting away with anything by only putting the month and year for your employment dates, even if those are the only options available. By putting January 2020 to December 2020 on your resume won't get you assessed at 52 weeks of experience. It will get you assessed at 44. Why? Because federal HR personnel default your start date to the last date of the month and your end date to the first. So by putting something like January 2020 to December 2020, you are basically putting down January 31st, 2020 to December 1st, 2020, 44 weeks. Even if you left mid-month, you want to get the credit for the time you actually worked. Which brings us to the hours worked per week and why you need to have them. In order for you to be assessed at having 52 weeks time and grade or 52 weeks of experience, the federal HR personnel need to know how many hours a week you worked. For the federal government, it is determined that full-time means 35 to 40 hours a week. Putting anything less means your experience won't be graded as full-time. What about putting more than 40 hours a week? If your normal duties required you to work more than 40 hours a week, on occasion, say so, but do it as an achievement, not a normal thing. Why? Because we understand you may have worked 60 hours a week, but what were you scheduled to work? If under 60 hours a week, put what you should have been working and then put as a bullet how you routinely work additional hours in order to ensure the success of the organization's mission or something like it. Excuse me. Back to the example. But what if you don't have 52 weeks of the required experience like in the first example? Here, we see that the applicant will only get credit for 24 weeks of experience, but needs 52 weeks of experience in one of the specialized experiences. For many of us, military veterans or not, we often do similar things in every job. You may have conducted quarterly performance evaluations in multiple positions, or maybe use certain management skills, technical or computer skills, report writing, etc., in multiple positions. It's important to include what you did in every experience that you did it. It doesn't matter if you duplicate the experience or bullets if you did it. If you did something in more than one experience, include it in both. By including conducted quarterly performance evaluations in both positions, this resume would get assessed at having 104 weeks of experience in that competency or skill. If you're shooting for more than just meeting the minimum qualifications, this is how you do it. What are your questions at this time over the dates? I see here military rank translate to GS grade. Casey, I can get into that later. Oh, there you go. Alex, I appreciate that. That's the exact document I use, but it's not required. Casey, regarding the translation from military rank to GS grade. I know an E7 just got picked up as a GS 12, even though that comptroller document says an E7 is equivalent to a GS 6. So sometimes it helps, sometimes it doesn't. So don't think that document that Alex posted is necessarily a hard rule. Check. Okay, so Miss or Mr. Love, presumably bullets shouldn't be more than 2 to 3 sentences. Ultimately, it's up to you. However, again, how can you best convey your knowledge training experience? David, for military, would we list the annual salary and hours per week per position on the resume? Let's wait until the after that. I think I understand what you're saying, but I don't want to give you a bad answer. All right. Now you may be asking yourself, but how do we tailor to this special, excuse me. Now you may be asking yourself, but how do we tailor to the specialized experience? Well, now that we have an idea of how to make sure our dates are correct and why, as well as how to show context within our experience by using the PAR STAR methods, let's take a look at how to use the specialized experience in the announcement to add even more clarity to our resume bullets and narratives. Let's take the specialized experience, preparing presentations, white papers, and reports for personnel at all levels. Everybody out there, take a moment. Yes, Christine, I will. So everybody, think about your own work experience for a moment and see if you can come up with a potential resume bullet for this specialized experience, which, by the way, is actually out of a USA Jobs announcement. Most of the information you will see in this, I don't want to say all, but most of the information, for instance, in these sections, when I pop out a specialized experience or a competency, these are all actually in announcements that I searched on USA Jobs. So here is the example I came up with. From the example, we see the applicant addressed preparing presentations, how often they did it, as well as all of the levels that they presented to. The applicant explained what systems or applications they used, as well as how they both wrote and verbally briefed the information. From this bullet, I see the person has technical competence, experience with oral and written communication, experience using Microsoft Office products, as well as experience speaking to employees, managers, and executives. There is something, however, that is very important and it's missing. Someone come off mute real quick. What are we missing? Numbers. There we go. This example bullet is purposefully missing quantifiable metrics. What was improved by all of this? How much? How long did it take? This bullet is missing the so what of why it was included in the resume. It is missing the results. There you go. Yep, the results. Good. All right. What are your questions about this section and building your experience and the specialized experience? So, can you show us later where to find the description of required duties, experiences at all GS levels for certain job title? It's not going to be for all job titles, Christine. However, the if you web search OPM competencies, it will open up their competency library, which includes a massive amounts of information. So I don't want to inundate everybody with that, but that is absolutely a rabbit hole that I recommend people go down. I did, and I learned a ton from it. Next, we will discuss how your resume will be graded. Reading through the announcement, you are told something to the effect of you will be evaluated on the basis of your level of competency in the following areas, or in the following areas. These areas are also called competencies. Most announcements will be different, so these are only examples. Based on these competencies, what is the announcement looking for? What do they mean? Well, OPM, the Office of Personnel Management, lists the definitions of their competencies and their multi-purpose occupational systems analysis inventory closed-ended mosaic competencies list. A link will be included at the end of this presentation. However, for full disclosure, they just published an update to this. Same name, different, well, same information, different title. So I will include that in the post-event email. However, for the sake of this training, the Mosaic Competency Dictionary is the same, so we're good to go. Using the Mosaic, you will find the meaning of the competencies that you'll be graded against, so that you can then use those definitions to help write your experience bullets and narratives. For this competency, the Mosaic Guide lists the definition as: identifies problems, determines accuracy and relevance of information, uses sound judgment to generate and evaluate alternatives, and to make recommendations. What could an experience bullet look like? How about this? Here, our imaginary applicant has included this bullet: evaluated business practices, processes devoted to scheduling, as well as an analysis of workflows, value added, impact, and utility derived from cost benefit analysis. Coordinated with regional IT team, provided guidance and directed the development of a regional scheduling system for scheduling of 3 HSPD sites across California. Results: increase in customer service, receiving no negative customer service experience or CSX comments while in the position, and the scheduling system being adopted by 2 other EPA regions. So looking back at our competency, does our bullet match what the competency is looking for? Problem solving, identifies problems, determines accuracy and relevance of information, uses sound judgment to generate and evaluate alternatives, and to make recommendations. By throw an answer in the chat box. Do you think that the bullet we have on the screen meets that criteria? If not, let me know what your questions are. Take a minute just in case people are slow typers. Feel free to come off mute also if you have a question. When I pause, well, I'll say that. So go ahead, if you want to come off mute, ask a question, go ahead, or type it into the chat box. All right, hearing none, seeing none, moving on. The assessment questionnaires measure expertise in job-related tasks and are used to screen and evaluate applicants. This assessment allows candidates to self-identify their relevant experience. These self-report questions are carefully developed to identify specific behaviors, education, and experience requirements that will separate good candidates from great ones. Yep, there you go, Renata. Good call. I was missing the numbers. We didn't go into that, but yes. And that was absolutely accurate, and I did that on purpose. So thank you for catching that. Most announcements include a link that allows you to preview the assessment questions prior to applying. These are a couple of examples of how to preview the questions and the assessment questionnaire. Up front, most assessment questionnaires are different. What we will go over here is an example taken from USA Jobs. Here's an example of what some of the questions you will be answering look like. Remember what I said about a test? Another example of a format you may find. This example requires you to select everything you have experience with that is applicable to the job you're applying for. If you select something, guess where else that information needs to be? That's right, your resume. If it's not included in your resume, it didn't happen. There are several other ways that the assessment questionnaire will ask you about your experience. Some will ask you to input examples. Others will ask for dates and job titles. Remember, you have to include everything the announcement and assessment questionnaire are looking for in your resume. Assessment questionnaires are also called self-assessments. This is where you get to select how well you think you qualify for the job. By quick show of virtual hands, who has heard that no matter what, you should always choose expert or the highest rating possible? All right, got a hand, got a couple hands. Oh, bunch of hands. All right, cool. Well, that is a big old myth. If you inflate your qualifications and or experience, for instance, your resume doesn't support the answers on the assessment questionnaire, you may be removed from consideration for the position. At a minimum, your self-assessment score will be downgraded and your resume may be put at the back of a pile. So make sure you rate yourself accurately and honestly. From here, we're going to go over an example of what should be reflected in your resume based on your self-assessment selection. However, before we do that, I have 5:07. So we're going to go ahead and take a 5-minute break. I have 5:07, so we will get going again at 5:12. So everybody go ahead and take a break, get some water, hit that bathroom, come on back, pound some coffee. We'll power through this last couple of slides, and then we will get to the question and answer. So feel free to come off mute. I'm going to step away for a second. I'll come back. If you got some questions or want to ask some questions until we get started again, I will be right back. Okay, I'm back. Did anybody have any questions until we get started again? Ebenezer, your hand is up. Do you have a question? No. There we go.
I had a quick question if you have a second.
I've got more in a second. I got 3 minutes.
So recently I know someone who applied for a job that was on USA Jobs and it was advertised as remote. They got through the whole process all the way up to accepting the offer and it was then revealed that it wasn't remote. Have you seen that or is that a trend of the recent times?
I
She
am
was
I am
completely
sitting in a job.
blindsided.
I am sitting in a job that not only did I receive a tentative job offer, I accepted the tentative job offer. I received a final job offer, and 2 days before I started, I went from 100% remote to must show up to work twice a week.
And they never revealed it throughout the whole process?
Nope, it happened right at the last little bit. Not related to what we're but sorry, squirrel moment. Yeah, no, they didn't apply it, and then when I looked for it, unfortunately my positions is not union protected, and the regulation actually states they can change it right up to the end. I did not have to accept the job.
Okay. That was the first that I heard of it, and that was one of the recent I'm retiring in February, so I'm like, okay, I'm gonna be applying to jobs, and until I figure out numbers wise, it's hard to say if I'm gonna look at remote or physically relocate for one. So when I heard that, I was like, oh, okay, that's something that I was not completely aware of possibly happening.
Yeah, most agencies are going to some form of telework. There's a bunch of them that are going remote within regions. For instance, you must be within 200 miles of the duty location because they still want you to come in for, large gatherings, big events, things like that. Does that
Okay,
make
that
sense?
makes sense.
The
Yes,
other side, the other side of it is you have to be aware that most federal jobs that you see that are remote, there's quintuple that number that are only available to current federal employees. So, the hardest thing is to get a federal job. Once you have a federal job, a lot of other things become easy.
okay, that makes sense. Thank you for taking the time because I wasn't sure if that was like an area that would be covered in this type of environment.
Not a problem. And yeah, and it sucks. I was unhappy about it, but you know what? I could have not worked. So it ended up being on me. It was kind of dirty pool, but at the same time, I like my job, and that's just where it ended up. So yes, if you're a prior government employee, should you blank out your SSN when you present SF50? I do. I blank out my SSN on everything, from DD214 to SF50 to anything that I have. I understand some documents have to have PII, like bank statement or the SF1199 or um, addresses, birthdays, things like that. But I try to blank out my social if I can, whenever I can. Correct, Jesus. That is what that means. If it says no, it means you're on your own. But again, it depends on the agency whether or not it's negotiable or not. So the you can't hurt to ask. All right, I have 513. All right, John's relooking. Okay, cool. All right, I have 513. We're gonna get back to it. From here, we're going to go over an example of what should be reflected in your resume based on your self-assessment selection. Again, this isn't the only way to do it, nor is it the only format that the question comes in. Bottom line, no matter what the assessment questionnaire is asking, your resume must reflect the answer you select. So let's think about this question: researching, analyzing, and developing reports, data tools, and providing training and leadership. Based on the question above, let's see ways your resume should look based on the potential answers. For this format of assessment questionnaire question, we're going to have 5 choices. 1, or A, you have no education or training. B, you have had education or training on how to perform the task but have not performed it. C, you have performed the task under close supervision. D, you have performed the task as rather part of your job, independent and usually without review. And E, this has been a major part of your work. I am highly skilled at performing this task and have supervised or trained others in the performance of this task, or others have consulted me as an expert for assistance. Well, for this one's easy. If you don't have experience, it won't be in your resume. But if it's in the assessment questionnaire and you select that you don't have experience, you may self-report and self-identify out of the running. The self-assessment questionnaire is the only automated portion of the entire job process. Jeff, awesome. Thank you very much for stopping by. Don't forget, this will be loaded onto YouTube tomorrow if you want to share it with your folks. All right, the next one. Moving on. From this example, we see the person has training, but they don't say that they've used it where or in what environment. The funny part is, if you look at this bullet, this is this type of bullet that I'm used to seeing when I review resumes. There's no context, no detail, no how, no when, no where, no how much, no results. Now we're getting more information from the resume bullet. Here we can see that the person has some experience, but not a ton. For those out there, don't be afraid to pick this one if it's accurate and it's as good as you can make your resume. Here, we have even more detail and more context. Finally, the expert. How could this bullet read? How about this? Notice that the examples are getting longer and longer. That is what detail and context looks like. For this example, again, I left out something very important, which would make it even stronger. What was that word? I think it was Christine said earlier. What could be added to give this more weight? That's right, quantifiable metrics, the numbers, the so what. I don't know how better to foot stomp this other than maybe this. If you're not sure about what to select, select the next lower choice. That way, if the HR reviewer sees you are more qualified, they can increase your self-rating. If you select something and it turns out that it was too low and you self-selected out of the running, then maybe the job wasn't meant for you. Now that you've got an idea of what we're talking about, let's dive into how to make sure we're clearly detailing our experience and hitting the announcement requirements. Wordsmithing your experiences. I don't know why this is continued, but cheers. When developing your experience bullets, you want to avoid using agency, career field, or military specific jargon. You also want to avoid terms like helped, worked, or assisted with. I have experience with. You want to avoid those terms. Instead, your bullet should clearly explain what you did, what tasks you completed, and were those tasks key to the successful completion of the mission? Did you improve anything, change anything, better anything? What specific skills, abilities, and or attributes did you employ to complete the task? What equipment or software did you use? Did you need context and detail? Avoid terms like responsible for and served as. Instead of responsible for, try managed or completed X tasks or some similar action verbs that embody initiative. Don't just say major duties include or currently I am working on. This assumes the reviewer knows what your position entails and what skills or competencies you demonstrated. They won't. You need to clearly state you did X, Y, and Z. Did I mention you need to avoid jargon when describing what you did? Moving on, I strongly recommend listing college education, military education, certifications, and other training separately. Pay attention to the announcement. Understand whether education will be a major factor or not in being qualified. Don't shortchange yourself just because you don't have a full degree yet. Many jobs are looking for experience and transferable skills that are communicated in the resume. Although it is always good to address education in the resume, you need to be conscious of whether or not it will be a deciding factor or not, so you don't have to be as detailed if it isn't. Again, don't forget to include your high school diploma or GED along with your GPA if you only have high school. Volunteer experience is an important section and can add a lot to your resume. Volunteer experience is any unpaid experience you might have. It can include work done through national service programs such as the Peace Corps or AmeriCorps, or work for other community-based philanthropic and social organizations like churches, schools, etc. This can include involvement in programs like FFA or 4-H or your child's school booster club. Volunteer experience can show critical competencies, knowledge, and skills you might have beyond your professional work experience. And it provides valuable training and experience that translates directly to your resume. With that, you should use volunteer experience. Sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. When adding volunteer experience, you need the name of the organization and location, exact dates of each period, number of hours worked per week, as well as a brief description of your duties, what you did, major roles, responsibilities, accomplishments, and achievements. All of this looks familiar, right? That's because volunteer experience is experience. I have also seen separate sections for affiliations as well. If you're affiliated with an organization out there, I encourage you to list it in this section and include everything you've done for them. Award sections are good to include if you have the room, but make sure you include a statement about any awards or decorations in your experience. This will give the experience more context, more detail, and push your resume beyond just meeting the minimum qualifications. And I recommend you have 3 professional references. That's it. That's the slide. The reason for that is I have spoken to many HR representatives, and the federal hiring process already takes a long time. And I do know several HR managers. Jesus, I'll get to that in a second. I do know several HR managers that like references included in your resume so they don't have to wait on you to begin calling your references if they want to move you on inside the hiring process. So do you have an SF50 for the awards? So unless it's asked for or something that the job's requiring, I would leave out the SF50 for awards, because sometimes SF50s for awards and SF50s for, say, within grade increases get mixed up. One is viable to determine your qualifications, your step, time and grade, those types of things. The other, the award SF50, is not. So just be careful about using those. So go ahead. What is your question about this? Let's see. Jozu? Joe's? You can go ahead and come off Jozue. Go ahead and come off mute. Ask your question.
Yeah, so the question I had with the references stuff, a lot of times on the jobs application wizard, it asks you for to provide the references on USA Jobs, but the resumes that I use always have the references in there with the like whatever position I held or whatever. Is it appropriate to like write see resume or anything like that, or just better off just going back and copying and pasting it over there?
So what you're saying is your references are also previous supervisors.
Yes.
I include them at the bottom in a separate section.
Okay.
So that, and two, maybe you don't want them calling particular supervisors. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So that's the reason I include it in a completely separate section. And I always include more than at least four, because part of the regulation to hire you, they being the agency HR specialist, must speak to 3 professional references minimum. So that's the reason I actually include, I think, 7 in my personal resume, just so if they're continuing on the process and want to hire me, they can talk to at least 3 people. If one person, is not answering the phone for some reason, they're not waiting. So it's three. So Christine, it's 3 minimum, as many as you want to do. Again, this is one of those, it's up to you things. It's just I recommend having at least 3. Not a problem. All right. For our veterans and transitioning service members on the call, the San Francisco Federal Executive Board's Military to Civilian Translation Guide is available on LinkedIn and Facebook. If you can't find it or like to contribute, feel free to email me and I will email you a copy. While this is focused towards the military, it is important to understand that jargon exists in all federal agencies and organizations, and what one agency calls a skill or is looking for could be called something completely different in another. That's why, even as current federal employees, that you write your resume in clear, easy to understand terms that doesn't have agency specific jargon. Here are just some examples from our guide for the veterans and military folks on the call. We've all heard it, and I've said it here several times. Your resume must be written in a language that the HR resume reviewer understands. The person reviewing your resume probably has no idea what the job is looking for, only what they're being told to review. And the likelihood that the HR reviewer understands what you did in the military is probably in the 0 to 1% range. This is why resumes must clearly state how you meet the qualifications for the position in terms the reviewers and managers understand. From the reference, we see examples. The U.S. Army, Navy, and Marine Corps are not federal agencies. However, Department of Defense, Department of the Army, and Department of Navy are. Military occupational specialty, what's that? It's nothing more than a career field or a specialty, maybe a job or duties. What is a mission other than a project, task, function, or objective? Some more examples from our guide. This bottom one is one of my favorites. Close air support, or CAS. I kind of gave away the punchline there. But what would be a way to translate that very specific military term into something a federal HR specialist understands? How about that? Customer service, you might be asking yourself. I'm sure some of you are giggling or smiling, but let's take a look at the definition of customer service. Customer service means works with clients and customers, that is, any individuals who use or receive the services or products that your work unit produces, including the general public, individuals who work in the agency, other agencies or organizations outside the government, to assess their needs, provide information or assistance, resolve their problems, or satisfy their expectations. Knows about available products and services, is committed to providing quality products and services. Seems to me like this translation hits pretty close. From my time in Iraq, close air support was absolutely resolving some of the problems I had. Couple more examples. Instead of Marines, soldiers, or airmen, use DoD employees, staff, personnel, workers. Instead of combat, use high stress operations, conflict, maybe support of national strategic objectives. Instead of brigade, like we said earlier, use organization of 2,000 personnel. Instead of units, try clients. Unit is its own thing. It's actually a civilian term, so you can use either one. How would you say subordinate units? You could say subordinate organizations or something along those lines. Lower echelon organizations, things like that. As we get closer to the end of our presentation, I would like to add these closing tips and reminders. Context matters. Explain what you did, how you did it, and if it made a difference. If it's not in your resume, then you didn't do it. Only include relevant information. For every bullet or narrative in your resume, ask yourself, so what? What is its purpose? How does it strengthen your resume and or reflect the specialized experience the announcement is looking for? Again, if it's not in your resume, then you didn't do it. I recommend you create one master resume using Word or your word processor of choice as a foundation, and then tailor copies of that for each announcement. A master resume allows you to put everything, all of your experience, no matter the job series, MOS, background, etc., into one place. State the facts, do not exaggerate. Avoid jargon and militarisms. And this isn't just for the vets. This is also important for current federal employees or trying to transfer agencies or applying for a position in a different career field. Next, use acronyms sparingly, if at all, and be sure to spell them out at least once. Go as far back on your resume as you need to in order to show you have the experience and qualifications the announcement is looking for. Next, find a mentor, pick their brain. There are some great private organizations out there like Vaterati, as well as the the Interagency Veterans Advisory Council is working on one specifically for veterans and military spouses. Finally, your resume must be clear. HR reviewers will not make any assumptions about your experience. If it's not in your resume, it didn't happen. For the veterans, when it comes to your resume, veterans preference and special hiring authorities, there are two different things and serve two different purposes. Veterans preference gives eligible veterans preference and appointment over many other applicants. In the competitive service, for instance, the federal system, When agencies use a numerical rating and ranking system to determine the best qualified applicants for a position, an additional 5 or 10 points are added to the numerical score of qualified preference eligible veterans. Veterans preference does not guarantee veterans a job, and it does not apply to internal agency actions such as promotions, transfers, reassignments, and reinstatements. Special hiring authorities, also known as hiring paths, help the federal government hire individuals that represent our diverse society. These special hiring authorities can be used to give you a head start when applying. It's best to think of each path as a route to the hiring manager. You want to put your resume on as many of those routes as possible to increase your chances of being hired. Special hiring authorities include veteran-specific paths like the Veterans Recruitment Appointment, or VRA, and the 30% or more disabled veteran hiring authority. There are other special hiring authorities for recent graduates, individuals with disabilities, or the Schedule A hiring authority, authorities for military spouses, as well as as well as authorities for Peace Corps and AmeriCorps alumni. Before we continue into the non-competitive authorities, I want to touch on the limitations of one authority in particular, the Veterans Employment Opportunity Act of 1988, or VEOA. The definition of the VEOA is a special hiring authority which gives eligible veterans access to positions that otherwise may have only been available to current competitive service employees. In VEOA appointments, preference eligibles and veterans are not given preference, but they are allowed to compete for job opportunities that are not offered to other external candidates. This means that even though veterans and active duty service members aren't technically considered federal employees, the VEOA allows us to compete for jobs that are only open to current or previous federal employees. What you need to be aware of is that using the VEOA typically means your resume will almost always be referred, no matter what, even if you barely meet the minimum qualifications. This should be a good thing, right? No, it is not. When I started applying for federal jobs, seeing my resume referred kept me from realizing that my resume wasn't anywhere near what the agency and HR professionals were looking for. So I kept using my burnt garbage resume to apply and getting referred. Apply and get referred. Apply and get referred. Apply and get referred. It wasn't until I took the time to dig into my resume and take a look at what the agencies actually wanted to see in my resume that I realized that the VEOA only allowed me to compete with current former federal employees for federal positions. It didn't offer me any preference or entitle me to a job, which of course is right there in the verbiage on OPM's site. Even if you are eligible and use the VEOA, your resume still needs to be on point. It needs to meet all the qualifications required by the announcement and assessment questionnaire and show that you are the best candidate for the position. You are still competing for the position. The VEOA isn't a shortcut for veterans. It just opens up the door and opportunities for us veterans to compete. For those who keep getting referred and have been using the VEOA but haven't been getting interviews, this might be why. Back to the special hiring authorities, which are also again known as non-competitive hiring authorities. Using one of these authorities means anyone who meets the minimum eligibility for a position can be selected so long as they qualify for one of the applicable hiring authorities. The San Francisco Federal Executive Board and the Veterans Federal Employment Collaborative have helped more than 60 people get hired to positions that did not even have open announcements on USA Jobs, using the Individuals with Disabilities or the Schedule A Special Hiring Authority and or the 30% or more disabled veteran hiring authority. I want to focus on these two for a moment. While the Schedule A and 30% or more disabled veteran hiring authorities may look similar, they are different. The 30% or more disabled veteran authority allows an agency to non-competitively appoint any veteran with a 30% or more service-connected disability rating from the Department of Veterans Affairs. If you are eligible, you are eligible if you have separated from active military service with a service-connected disability rating of 30% or more, or have a rating by the Department of Veterans Affairs showing a compensable service-connected disability of 30% or more. Sounds great, but This authority can only be used once you're out of the service and have been granted a disability rating, and not for applications our transitioning active duty service members might be submitting while they're in their last 120 days of service. Now let's talk about the Schedule A hiring authority for a moment. Excuse me. You are eligible for a Schedule A hiring authority if you are a person with severe physical disability, psychiatric disability, or intellectual disability. Now, I know many of us shy away from using terms like disabled or person with disabilities when referring to ourselves, but will you or have you submitted a VA claim for a service-connected disability? When you look at what the U.S. Office of Personnel Management considers a person with severe physical disability, psychiatric disability, or intellectual disability, and compare that to what you've submitted to the VA, they often match. Don't know if your condition or conditions would qualify you for a Schedule A? Do a web search for the SF-256 or OPM's self-identification of disability form. If you see your condition or a diagnosis you have in your medical records listed anywhere on that form, then you're probably eligible for the Schedule A hiring authority. To show Schedule A eligibility, you will need a Schedule A letter, which can be signed by your treating physician, physical therapist, or even a Veterans Affairs vocational rehabilitation counselor. For those of you on active duty and your care goes through a military treatment facility, they can sign the letter as well. If they give you any pushback, feel free to reach out to me or the medical leadership of David Grant Medical Center at Travis Air Force Base with questions, or if your local facility refuses to sign the Schedule A letter. This is something that I personally take very, very much to heart and will help you fight that issue if you're an active duty service member and your military treatment facility refuses to sign a Schedule A letter for you. As we move towards the end, these are a couple of additional resources. OPM has published multiple videos on YouTube regarding writing your resume, communicating qualifications, volunteer experiences. The National Institute of Health also has a competency dictionary, much like the Mosaic. The Federal Workforce Competency Initiative and General Competencies and Competency Models, which is the updated Mosaic Guide, is located here at OPM's website. Link to your joint service transcript, as well as your verification of military experience and training, as well as links on USA Jobs and Feds Hire Vets with veterans preference information and veteran special hiring authorities. The Department of Energy has a resume guide online, as does the FBI. I have never particularly used them, but if you're interested in knowing more about cover letters, the IRS as well as the USDA both have cover letter guides on their systems. There is, Terry, I can send you a template with the final after this presentation, which it looks like we are now there. This concludes the resume development portion of our webinar. I would like to thank everybody by me posting up my contact information here on screen. When you have a moment, please feel free to shoot me comments on how you thought the presentation went, how I can make it better, etc. Your feedback is important to make future webinars even more effective. The QR code you see is to my Popl account, which is my digital card. Go ahead and scan that, save me into your contact section. It will pop up with my email address as well as my LinkedIn account, as well as our Veterans Federal Employment Collaborative links on LinkedIn and Facebook. At this time, I've got no other slides. However, I am here for you. What questions you have at this time, go ahead and raise your hand and I will choose you when I see you. All right, I've got Mr. or Mrs. Love. Go ahead and come off mute.
Hey, Brock, can you hear me okay?
I can hear you great.
Hey, first of all, that was just a fantastic brief and a lot of really good information, and I really appreciate you being available for us. as a transitioning military person with about 8 months left in the service, I just had a couple of questions. One, early on, you had mentioned about the 180-day myth, and so I was really excited to see that as a myth. But I just wanted to get just a little bit more clarification on that. So, if I understood you correctly, that 180 days is only applicable to if we're trying to find jobs in DoD, but not applicable for agencies outside of the DoD. Is that, did I understand you correctly?
You are correct. So the 180-day restriction towards federal employment only applies to active duty retirees and only applies to them applying to Department of Defense positions.
Ah, got it. Okay.
Something I have recently learned, there are even waivers. There are waivers for that have been pushed down to, for instance, in the National Guards, it's down to the adjutant general level for technicians, Title 32, Title 5 technicians with the National Guards. There are also some activities or several activities and locations out there. I think the Navy, sorry, I don't have it off the top of my head. I probably should have it in the future. But there are organizations, job titles, job series that are wavered. So you should absolutely, if that's something that interests you, don't not apply to it just because it's DoD.
Okay.
But be aware that the 180-day restriction only applies to DoD. I retired in 2021. I started with the Environmental Protection Agency less than a month later, and it only took that long because I had some questions about wage and grade, step increase, things like that had to be negotiated. So I would have actually started while I was on terminal leave if I would have just taken the initial offer.
Oh, got it. And that's a nice segue to my last question with regards to potentially finding a job and starting while on terminal. So it sounds like you are able to apply without having a DD-214. Is that correct? And if so, how do you put yourself out there for potential jobs without having a DD-214? Is there a section on the application that you can speak to that?
I got you, bro. We're good. It is called a statement of service. I have one posted on LinkedIn and can send one in the post-event email. All it basically is a letter from your commander or personnel section stating you're a good dude. You're getting out at this time, this date under honorable conditions. Doesn't have a DD-214 yet. Is basically it will be used in lieu of a DD-214 for veterans preference, veteran special hiring authorities as you approach. Be mindful, however, that most federal agencies or a lot of federal agencies I've seen do limit your ability to apply more than 120 days out from your separation or retirement date. So it's not your terminal leave date, it's your actual retirement date. So just kind of be cognizant of that.
Okay. Hey man, greatly appreciate it. Thank you so much.
No worries. And if you connect with me on LinkedIn, I've got copies of all those that form as well as the Schedule A letter, the SF-256, all of that posted on LinkedIn as well.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
No problem. I see a couple hands up. Before that, I want to hit some of these comments. When writing bullets, should I focus on duties or the qualifications of the job announcement? So with that said, you need to concentrate on both. The duties, you want to use the qualifications, the special requirements. So if the job announcement says you will be doing X, Y, and Z, but the specialized experience says you need to do A, B, and C, you want to focus on the specialized experience required in the announcement, not the duties that it says that you'll be doing. However, if you want to include those duties as examples of what you've done, by all means, but make sure you're absolutely hitting the specialized experience requirements, because if you don't have those specialized experience within your resume, even if you have the greatest examples of how you perform the duties they're looking for, if you don't have those specialized experience in your resume, you will not be assessed as being qualified for the position. Kenny asked, should you reach out to the human resources recruiters on LinkedIn of a federal agency post application to get your name out there? That's iffy because sometimes the recruiters aren't the same people as the HR folks that take the information in. However, I will say that some recruiters, Jeffrey Jack for the Customs and Border Protection and Chip Lankert are both two peers of mine. Chip Lankert is with FEMA. He actually does a great federal resume and FEMA info session twice a month on Wednesdays, I believe it is. So if you want to learn more about FEMA, feel free to connect with him. He's a pretty open book. He's a good dude, and he will get back to you. But you know, you don't want to be a pest, but at the same time, yes, you do want to get your name out there. However, I would also recommend that maybe you contact your local FEB. Something we do and something I work with my federal partners in doing is I have a list of jobs that are closed that aren't on USA Jobs currently that I am helping people develop their resumes and then sending their resumes directly to the hiring manager. Earlier in the presentation, I discussed how we, the FEB, have managed to get over 60 people hired. That's how. So I hope that answers your question. Repeat the OPM form besides the 256 under Schedule A. So yes, the SF 256 is the Schedule A form. The Schedule A letter, it is something you're going to have to write yourself or have your doctor write. It needs to be on your doctor's letterhead. And it is, if you just web search OPM Schedule A letter example, that will pop up. Casey asked, should your resume bullets be focused on duties or qualifications? I think I already hit that. You need to make sure to hit the qualifications and specialized requirements of your resume. All right, I see a hand. Renata, you've got your hand up. Go ahead.
Yes, I had a question on the hiring statuses, the slide that had the veteran, disability, and you get the extra 5 points.
This one here?
Yes.
Okay.
So what if you have more than one? So for example, I just recently graduated, but I'm also going to be a veteran that's retiring. Do you get points for each status, or is one higher than the other? How does that work?
Okay, so remember what I said. Veterans preference and special hiring authorities are two completely different things. Veterans preference gives you that 5-10 points to your resume when you know it's contabulated, and you know it's sometimes agencies use 0 to 100, sometimes 0 to 800. But in the end, what they'll do is they will give you then an extra 5 or 10 points on your resume, your final grade on your resume. That's the veterans preference. That's the limit of what the veterans preference does. These, on the other hand, your students and recent graduates, your individuals with disabilities, your veterans, these are special hiring authorities. These are hiring paths. Think of them as roads and routes to the hiring manager. If you are eligible to be on more than one, be on more than one. You want your resume to be on as many of those hiring paths as possible to get you to the hiring manager. Did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you for clarifying.
No problem. And so you're in the military?
Yes, retiring in February.
Awesome. Don't forget. So something, a little cool thing about being in the military, the recent graduate special hiring authority has a limit of 2 years after you get your diploma, unless you were in the service when you got it. Then you have an additional 6 years from the time you get your diploma for it to be valid.
So I just got my NBA in July of this year. Do I have to do anything specifically other than mentioning it on my resume to get that 6-year?
No, but so you see the little gold circle with looks like the little cap on it. There are jobs out there posted on USA Jobs that only want students or recent grads. So the fact that you're eligible for that hiring authority means you, unlike every other veteran out there that may not have the recent grad, you can apply to those jobs. Whereas you can also apply to the veteran jobs. See what I mean? So now you just expanded your ability to apply to jobs because some agencies only want recent grads. They only want veterans, or they only want individuals with disabilities. And that's why I recommend expanding out, you know, even if you're already more than 30% disabled, also get your Schedule A letter. That way, you're not just applying as a veteran or a wounded veteran, you're applying as an individual with disabilities, which has nothing to do with your veteran status.
Okay, thank you so much.
Not a problem. So let's go back to the chat box real quick. Thank you so much. Last question. Is it best to apply early as possible for roles on USA Jobs? Also, if you example apply on, but now want to edit your application, resubmit, you know how this. So ultimately you can't, I'll start the last one and work backwards. So if you applied on 9/20 and it hasn't closed yet, you can do as much as you want to your application until the announcement closes. Once the announcement closes, you are in layman's terms, SOL. But yes, applying early is best. I recommend getting a federal job, figuring out what your priorities are. The hardest thing about federal employment is getting a federal job. Once you're in the system, it's easy to work or move around. And for instance, I worked for the EPA for 6 months and then applied to the job I have now. Not only was it an up in prestige, but also a promotion. So don't think you have to be stuck. This isn't, for those of you in the military, this isn't the military. You don't have to stay in a position that you don't want to be in. If it turns out you don't like it, maybe the commute ended up being too far, your family situation changed, those kinds of things. Mr. Love, yes, USA Jobs is the definitive source for federal jobs. However, LinkedIn is a great location for it. Again, if you join the Veterans Federal Employment Collaborative, or for those that aren't veterans, follow me on LinkedIn. I'm always sharing information from some of my folks that I'm gonna kill this guy real quick, so you guys don't need to see my thing. But I will come up, and you join that. Check out USA Jobs. They're always